At an arranged marriage, the billionaire CEO said, "You're black and not my type," until she became pregnant by. There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside a room where someone has just decided you do not exist. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest, the silence of erasure. Naomi had walked into that silence on a Wednesday morning in October, standing in a boardroom 40 floors above Washington, D.C., watching the man she was contractually bound to marry glance at her once, just once, and then turn his pale gray eyes back to the window, like the view outside was simply more interesting than she was. She had promised herself she would not flinch. She kept that promise, but she felt it all the way down. Welcome to Untold Desires by Mr. Lewis, the channel where love is never simple and the women at the center of these stories are never small. If you are new here, fears subscribe right now because you are about to feel something. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my family is watching from tonight. Let us get into it. The Whitmore estate in Georgetown was the kind of house that had been photographed so many times for architectural magazines that it had stopped feeling like a place where a person could actually breathe. 5 stories of federal-style brick, black frame windows that caught the afternoon light like cold eyes, and a staff of 11 who moved through its corridors with the practiced silence of people trained to be invisible. Naomi arrived on a Friday evening in a car she did not request, carrying 2 suitcases and a leather portfolio that held everything she had read 3 times over about Whitmore Capital and the man at its center. She had done her research, and that was the first thing anyone who knew Naomi understood about her. She never walked into a room she had not already studied from the outside. She knew that Callum Reeves Whitmore had grown the firm from $4 billion to 9 in 6 years. She knew he rarely attended social functions, gave no interviews, and had never, not once in any record she could find, been photographed looking at ease. She knew his mother had died when he was 19. She had noted that detail and filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things that explained people without excusing them. What her research had not prepared her for was the specific quality of his absence on her first night in his house. He was home. She knew because Victor Ashby, Callum's legal counsel, had confirmed the schedule. She heard his footsteps on the floor above her. She heard the low murmur of a phone call through the ceiling, the particular cadence of a man who spoke in half sentences because full ones were inefficient. She sat in the dining room where a staff member named Claudette had set a dinner for 2, and she waited 40 minutes before she accepted what the untouched second-place setting was already telling her. She ate alone. The food was extraordinary. She left his plate covered in case he came down. He did not come down. In the morning, she found the plate exactly where she had left it. Claudette removed it without comment, but her eyes held an apology she was clearly not permitted to voice. Naomi thanked her for the coffee, carried it to the east-facing window in the library, and watched the October light come up over the Potomac while she went through her father's latest medical reports on her tablet. Emmanuel Osei Mensah's latest cognition evaluation showed incremental improvement. Small, tentative, enough. She held that number like a coal against her chest and let it warm her through the cold of everything else. When Callum finally appeared at 8:30, dressed for the office and moving with the purposeful indifference of a man who had timed his arrival to avoid conversation, Naomi looked up from her tablet and said good morning the way she said everything. Evenly, without apology. He stopped. Not because he wanted to, because courtesy required a minimum response, and he was, at his core, a man who met minimums. "Morning," he said. Then, without pausing, "The car leaves at 8:45 if you need the driver." "I have my own car," Naomi said. "Fine. Callum." She said his name the way her father had taught her to say hard things. Not as a summons, but as a fact. "I am not going to perform gratitude for being here. I know the terms. I will meet them, but I will not be managed in my own house." The pause that followed was brief. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a recalculation she was not meant to see. "Noted," he said, and walked out. She turned back to the window. Small victory. She recorded it privately and moved on. The first public event was a Whitmore Capital donor gala 3 weeks into the marriage, held at the Andrew W. Mellon Auditorium, a room designed by someone who believed grandeur was a moral position. Naomi wore a gown the color of midnight, off the shoulder, marked with a neckline that honored the architecture of her collarbone and a hem that moved like water when she walked. Her hair was out, full, dark, and unapologetic, pinned back from her face with two gold combs her mother had left her. She had decided long before she arrived that she would enter this room as herself or not at all. Callum met her at the top of the entrance steps. He looked at her the way he looked at most things, assessingly, briefly, without warmth. But his jaw was set in a way it had not been a moment before, and he offered her his arm with a stiffness that suggested the gesture cost him something he had not budgeted for. They entered together. The room noticed. For the first hour, she stood beside him and watched how power worked in his world. Who approached him, who waited to be approached, who laughed at the right moments. She was introduced 4 times as my wife and 0 times by name. The 4th time, she extended her own hand before his introduction could land and said, "Naomi Whitmore, I run the OC Mensa healthcare portfolio within the firm. It is wonderful to meet you." The investor she was speaking to, a heavyset man named Garrett Pell, who ran a mid-Atlantic insurance group and clearly had not expected her to have a sentence of her own, blinked, then smiled with the surprised respect of a man revising his assumptions in real time. "Naomi, of course, Emmanuel's daughter. Your father built something remarkable." "He did," she said. "We intend to build further." She felt Callum watching her from 3 feet away. She did not look at him. Later, near the bar, she overheard it. She was not meant to. 2 men standing just behind a pillar, voices low but not low enough, speaking with the casual cruelty of people who believed they were in a private room, even in public. One voice she did not recognize, and the other belonged to a board member she had been introduced to an hour earlier. He actually went through with it, the arrangement. Apparently, she's not exactly a pause that was worse than the word it replaced. She's not what you'd expect. Whitmore's always been transactional. Give it a year. Naomi took a slow breath. She set her glass down on the nearest tray with absolute steadiness. She turned and walked back toward the center of the room with her spine straight and her chin level, and her face holding the expression of a woman who had heard nothing interesting. Because that was the only power available to her in that moment, and she would not waste it on the satisfaction of their noticing. Victor Ashby was standing near the edge of the dance floor and saw her face in the 10 seconds after she crossed back into the light. He said nothing. But when she reached for a fresh glass, he was beside her, and he said quietly, without making it a question, "You're the most composed person in this room." "Low bar," she said. He laughed, genuinely. She found to her own surprise that she almost smiled back. Callum took her home in silence. At the door of the estate, she thanked the driver and went upstairs without waiting for him. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time, not crying, just feeling the weight of the evening settle into her bones and deciding what to do with it. She decided to sleep. Tomorrow was another day she intended to survive in full. The weeks that followed had a rhythm Naomi learned to read the way she learned everything, by watching the pattern until its logic revealed itself. Callum left early and returned late. He worked through dinner on most nights. He did not seek her out. He did not ask her questions. He was not hostile exactly. He was managed. There was a precise distance he maintained, calibrated to avoid contact without requiring active effort, and she understood it as the architecture of a man who had decided in advance what she was allowed to be to him. She did not try to exceed the boundary, but she stopped pretending it was not there. She had started working from the estate's East Wing library, which had better light and a conference table large enough for the portfolio documents she was reorganizing. She was 3 weeks into restructuring the OC Mensa Medical Archive, preparing it for the Whitmore board presentation, when she found a discrepancy in the original acquisition filing. Small, almost invisible, a date misalignment between 2 subsidiary documents that should have been identical. She flagged it mentally, set it in a folder, and kept working. On a Thursday evening, she made dinner. Not for performance. Because Claudette had the night off and the kitchen was quiet, and she found cooking meditative in the way her mother had. A practice of attention that asked nothing philosophical of her. She made jollof rice the way her father had taught her, with the slightly smoky base that required patience and a specific confidence about heat. She made enough for two and set a plate outside Callum's office with a note that said only, "It is there if you want it," because she was not going to perform the gesture, and she was not going to hide it either. An hour later, she walked past, and the plate was gone. She went to bed not knowing what to make of that, which was, she was slowly learning, the most honest way to feel about anything involving Callum Whitmore. The shift, and there was a shift. She felt it the way you feel a change in pressure before weather arrives. Began at a partners meeting 6 weeks into the marriage. Naomi had been invited as a courtesy. She understood that. She prepared as though she had been invited as a principal. When the discussion moved to the healthcare division's Q4 projections and the senior VP presented numbers that Naomi had already identified as structurally optimistic, she waited until he finished and then raised her hand and spoke for 4 minutes. She did not hedge. She presented the corrected model, explained the methodology, and answered the three immediate challenges to her analysis without referring to a single note. The room was quiet in a way that rooms get quiet when something unexpected has just realigned the furniture. Garrett Pell, who was present as an external stakeholder, leaned toward the man beside him and said something Naomi could not hear. The man nodded. Callum, who had been sitting at the head of the table with his pen moving in the slight, rhythmic tap of a man performing patience, had gone completely still. He was looking at her, not the brief assessing glance from the gala steps. Looking. The particular quality of attention he gave financial models when they surprised him. She gathered her papers after the meeting and was almost to the door when he said her name. She turned. "The secondary variance in your model," he said. "You built that from the Q2 filing discrepancy." It was not a question, but it held one inside it. "Yes," she said. "How long have you been sitting on that?" "Since October 14th. Something moved across his face that she would spend the next several days trying to name. "That was thorough," he said. "I do thorough work," she said. "That has always been true, whether or not anyone in the room was ready to see it." She left before he could respond. She heard Victor laugh behind her as the door closed. The night Priya Nair came to the estate was a Tuesday, unannounced, and Naomi answered the door because she happened to be crossing the foyer when the bell rang. The two women stood across the threshold from each other in a silence that contained considerably more information than either of them had agreed to exchange. Priya was beautiful in the way of a woman who had learned to hold herself as though beauty was a professional credential. Yeah, she was composed. She was looking at Naomi with an expression that was not hostility. It was something more complicated than that. Something that held its own wound inside it. "Is Callum home?" Priya said. "He is," Naomi said. A pause. Then Priya said, with a quiet that felt like it cost her, "You're not what I expected." Naomi held the door open. "I rarely am," she said. "I'll let him know you're here." She found Callum in his office, knocked once, opened the door, and said without editorial, "Priya Nair is at the door." His face did something complicated. Then he set down his pen. "Tell her I'll be a few minutes." "I already let her in," Naomi said. "She's in the foyer." She went back to her work. She heard the low register of their voices in the hallway for 12 minutes. She heard the front door close. She did not go to see which side of it Priya was on when it did. Callum appeared in the library doorway 20 minutes later. And he stood there for a moment in the way he sometimes did, like a man who had arrived somewhere and was no longer certain why. "That did not need to be your problem," he said. "It wasn't," Naomi said without looking up. "Good night, Callum." He stayed in the doorway a moment longer than was necessary. Then he left. She looked up at the empty doorway for a long time after he was gone. The discrepancy in the acquisition filing sat in its folder on her desktop. She clicked it open. Ida looked at it for a moment, then closed it again. Not yet. She did not know what it meant yet. She did not know that in her father's rehabilitation facility in Baltimore, in the drawer beside his bed, there was a folded piece of paper with her email address on it in his handwriting and the words "cloud account." "You need to look." She did not know that yet. What she did know, lying awake that night in a house that smelled like wood polish and expensive silence, who was that she had developed a habit she had not consented to. Every evening she noticed what time his footsteps crossed the floor above. She noticed when the light under his office door went dark. She noticed the specific weight of his attention in that partners' meeting and how it had felt for 4 terrible seconds, like the things she had stopped letting herself want. She noticed all of it and told herself she was simply gathering data. She was an excellent liar when the subject was herself. And the second humiliation arrived in the form of a dinner party at the Whitmore Capital chairman's residence. Gerald Whitmore's penthouse on the 40th floor of a building on Connecticut Avenue that felt less like a home and more like a statement of intent. Naomi had not met Gerald yet. Callum had not offered to introduce them, and she had not asked. Gerald Whitmore was 67 and built like a man who had spent his life making himself immovable. He had Callum's jaw and none of Callum's restraint. He kissed her hand at the door with a courtesy so practiced it had no warmth inside it, and his eyes moved over her face with the appraising deliberateness of a man pricing something he already owns. "Naomi," he said. "Emmanuel's girl." She registered the word. She let nothing show. "His daughter," she said pleasantly. "Yes." Dinner was 12 people. She was seated at the far end of the table from Callum, beside a woman who barely spoke to her, and a retired senator who asked about her background 3 times in 40 minutes in ways that had nothing to do with her professional history. She answered each question with complete composure and a patience that was its own form of resistance. Midway through the meal, Gerald raised his glass from the head of the table and made a toast to the firm's healthcare expansion. He listed the assets acquired. He listed the portfolio metrics. He used the phrase, the O.C. Mensa Medical Archive, twice, with the proprietary comfort of a man describing furniture he had purchased. He did not look at Naomi once. She held her glass up with everyone else. She did not look at Callum, but she felt him looking at her. Later in the car home, the silence was different from its usual quality. It was denser. Callum sat beside her and looked straight ahead, but his right hand, resting on his knee, was closed in a fist so slight she would have missed it if she had not learned to read the small vocabularies of his body. "You did not have to attend," he said. It came out wrong. She could tell from the slight pause after it that he knew it came out wrong. "It is your father's dinner party," she said. "Of course I attended." "He can be. I know what he is," she said. It came out quietly and with complete authority. "I had him assessed within the first 4 minutes. I handled it. I always handle it." Silence. Then she said, still looking forward, "What I want to know, Callum, is whether you are ever going to say something. In one of those rooms. When they speak about my family's work, like it was something they found on the side of a road." He did not answer immediately. "I handle my father," he said finally. "That is not what I asked." The car reached the estate. She got out without waiting for the driver to open her door, walked inside and went upstairs. She stood in her room with her hands flat on her dresser and her eyes on her own reflection, and she breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The way her father had taught her when she was 11 and her mother was gone, and the grief was too large for a child's body to hold. She was still doing that, breathing through the unbearable. And she was still here. She was still whole. She would still be whole tomorrow. What she did not know was that Callum sat in the car for 6 minutes after she went inside, that he did not move, that Victor called twice and he did not answer. And she did not know that when he finally came inside and walked past her closed door, he stopped. His hand came up, not quite touching the wood, hovering for a full, long, private moment. Then he walked away, and neither of them slept. The call from the rehabilitation facility came on a Sunday night in December. Naomi was in the library when her phone lit up with a number she had memorized the way you memorize the number of the person your life depends on. She was in her coat and at the door in under 4 minutes. The car was at the front of the estate, and she got in and told the driver to go, and she called the facility back and listened to the night nurse explain that her father had suffered a secondary cardiac event, that he was stable, but the next several hours were uncertain, that she should come. When the drive to Baltimore was 50 minutes, she sat in the back of the car and did not cry because crying required a part of her she could not spare right now, and she held the phone in both hands and looked at her father's last text message, sent 3 days ago, which said only, "Proud of you, check the cloud account. Old files, important." She had meant to ask him about it. She had kept meaning to. She walked through the facility doors at 11:40 and the night nurse met her in the corridor and said, "He's resting. His vitals have stabilized." She exhaled. She leaned against the wall for exactly 3 seconds to let her legs remember their purpose. Then she pushed off and walked to her father's room. Callum was already there. She stopped in the doorway. He was sitting in the chair beside her father's bed. His jacket was over the back of the chair. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows. When he was not on his phone, he was just there, elbows on his knees, quiet, present, in the particular posture of a person who has decided to be somewhere and means it. Her father was asleep. The monitors beeped their steady testimony. Naomi stood in the doorway for a long moment and felt something shift in her chest that she did not have language for and was not ready to name. "How long have you been here?" she said. He looked up. Something moved behind his gray eyes. "Few hours," he said. "I feel why?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a clean answer for that." She walked into the room. She sat in the second chair on the other side of her father's bed and put her hand over Emmanuel's. His skin was warm. He did not stir. They sat across from each other in the low light for a very long time and did not speak, and it was the first silence she had been in with Callum that did not feel like absence. It felt like the opposite of that. At some point she said, without planning to, he used to sing to me in Twy when I was small. I don't remember the words anymore, just the sound of it." She had not meant to say that to him. Callum was quiet. Then he said, "My mother used to leave her paint on the door frames. She was an architect, but she painted on weekends. She'd get absorbed and forget where her hands were." A pause. "I kept one door frame in the house. After everything." She looked at him across her sleeping father. He was looking back. The drive home was dark and quiet, and the rain had begun. The soft, persistent kind that makes the world feel small and close. They were neither of them speaking. She was watching the city lights blur through the window and feeling the strange, exposed quality of having said something true to someone she had been carefully keeping at a distance. She did not remember afterward which one of them moved first. She remembered only that they were in the foyer of the estate, and the distance between them had narrowed to something she had not consented to consciously. And when his hand came up to her face, not hurried, not desperate, the way a man touches something he is afraid might not be real, she did not step back. She had intended to step back for weeks, and she was finally too tired to carry out the intention. What passed between them that night was not a collision. It was a door opening that they both, with full awareness, chose to walk through. She remembered the particular warmth of being held by someone who had stopped performing indifference. The way he said her name once, low, like he was hearing it for the first time. The way she let herself be held without keeping score. She remembered before everything changed that it felt like the truth. She lay awake afterward in the dark and listened to the rain and felt the specific, terrifying tenderness of a person who has given something they cannot get back. And she did not yet know whether that was a beginning or the most exquisite form of destruction she had ever agreed to. She was about to find out, because in the drawer of her father's nightstand in Baltimore, the folded note with her email address on it was still waiting, and the files in the cloud account she had not yet opened were still there, patient and quiet and about to change everything. Now tell me something. Do you think Naomi should trust what she felt in that room? Drop "I felt it too" in the comments if this story already has your heart. Hit like right now if you felt that scene with her father hit different. 3 mornings after the night in the foyer, Naomi woke before sunrise and lay in the gray quiet for a long time, just feeling the shape of the silence. Something in the house was different, not in the way good things stay different. In the way a room feels after something fragile has been dropped, but you have not yet turned on the light to see the damage. She went downstairs. Callum was in the kitchen. He had his back to her, a coffee cup in hand, looking out the window at the frost-covered garden. He heard her. She knew he heard her. His shoulders shifted by a degree, but he did not turn. She sat at the table. She poured from the carafe he had already set out. She waited. He turned eventually, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has rehearsed a position and found it inadequate and is delivering it anyway. "Last night shouldn't—" He stopped. Started again. "The circumstances were unusual. Your father's situation. I don't want you to read it as something it wasn't. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a sentence landing exactly as badly as it deserved. Naomi looked at him across the kitchen. She felt the words reach her chest and stop, like something hitting a wall that had been quietly constructing itself for 3 months. She had not known until this moment that the wall was already finished. She had not known how finished she was. The circumstances, she said. Naomi, no, not raised, flat, final. I am not going to have this conversation with you, not because I am hurt, because it is beneath the both of us and you know it. She picked up her coffee. She went back upstairs. She did not slam the door because she was not a person who slammed doors, and because silence, in her experience, was always the louder statement. She sat on the edge of her bed, and her hands were very steady, and she felt a particular cold clarity descending that she recognized from the days after her mother died and the days after her father's stroke. The clarity that arrives when you understand that grief is not an excuse to stop functioning, it is a requirement to function more precisely. As she reached for her tablet, she opened her email, and there it was, the message her father had sent 3 weeks ago, forwarded from his personal account. Subject line blank, body containing only a shared link to a cloud storage folder. She almost did not open it. She was tired. Her heart was doing something that required management. She almost closed the tablet. She opened the link. The folder contained 43 documents. She recognized the header of the first one immediately. It was a Whitmore Capital internal filing, an original acquisition document from 2 years ago, the same period when her father's practice had begun to collapse under the debt. She started reading. By the time she reached the 9th document, her breathing had changed. By the 23rd document, she understood what her father had found during one of his lucid intervals and why he had sent it to her without explanation. As if the documents were self-explanatory, as if he could not bring himself to write the words. Gerald Whitmore had manufactured the debt, not allowed it to accumulate, not failed to prevent it, manufactured it through a series of fraudulent financial instruments introduced into the Ose Mensa practice accounts via a shared services agreement that Emmanuel had signed without understanding what it contained. The debt that had made the arranged marriage feel like the only option. The debt that had brought Naomi here, into this house, into this marriage, into the kitchen an hour ago where Callum had looked at her and called what happened between them a circumstance, was not real. It had been built by his father for the purpose of acquiring the medical portfolio at a fraction of its actual value. She sat with the tablet in her hands for a very long time. The question that arrived was not about what to do. Naomi was a woman who always knew what to do. The question was slower and more painful than that. It was, did Callum know? She did not move for a full hour. Then she stood, dressed, and drove herself to Baltimore to sit with her father. Emmanuel was awake, more present than he had been in weeks, eyes clear and tracking her face with the particular attention of a man who has been waiting to see if his message was received. She sat beside him and held his hand and said, "I found them, Dad." He exhaled. The relief in it was enormous. He said slowly, with the careful construction of a man rebuilding speech one deliberate stone at a time, "He needs to know. Callum, if he doesn't know already." A pause. "If he does," his hand tightened on hers, "then you come home." "I know," she said. "Naomi." He turned his face toward her. His eyes were dark and warm and deeply specific. The eyes of a man who saw her the way nobody else in her life had consistently seen her. "You don't owe a single person in that house a version of yourself that costs you everything." She pressed her forehead to the back of his hand. She did not cry, but it was the closest she had come in months. She was 3 weeks pregnant. She did not know that yet. The tiredness she had been carrying she attributed to stress, to the late nights, to the emotional taxation of the life she was living. She would know in 4 days when a test she bought almost by accident at a pharmacy on the way home from the facility turned the world over. But she did not know yet. And Callum, who was sitting in his car outside the rehabilitation facility when she walked out, who had driven to Baltimore without telling anyone why, who had sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to decide whether he had the right to follow her here, saw her walk through those doors and felt something in his chest that he had spent 19 years learning to prevent. She did not see him. She got into her own car and drove back to the city. He sat in the parking lot for a long time after her taillights disappeared. He picked up his phone. He called Victor. I need you to pull the original Ose Mensa acquisition documentation, he said. The complete file. Everything my father's team filed. Victor was quiet for a moment. Why? Because I need to see it. A pause. Callum, how much do you think is in there? I don't know, Callum said. That's why I need to see it. He drove home. He did not sleep. He sat in his office with the documents Victor sent him at 2 in the morning, and he read with the focused horror of a man discovering that the ground beneath his life was not stone, but paper, and that someone he shared his name with had built his empire on a fraud that reached directly into the hands of a woman who had just looked at him across a hospital room like he might be something real. He read everything twice. Then he sat in his chair and did not move for a very long time. He knew. He knew now. He had not known before, or he told himself he had not known before. And the difference between those two things was the question he would have to answer for himself and eventually for her. And he was not ready for either. When Naomi came home at 9:30 that morning, she found him in the foyer. Not moving through it, standing in it, waiting. She stopped. The acquisition documents, he said. Her face did not change. Her eyes did. You've seen them, he said. Yes, she said, and the silence was the kind that holds a verdict. I need you to know I did not structure that deal, he said. The original arrangement. I was brought in after the terms were set. I was told the debt was... He stopped. Something in his jaw was working. I should have audited it myself. I did not audit it. That is on me. It is, she said. Naomi, did you suspect something was wrong? The pause was half a second too long. I had questions, he said, about the speed of the acquisition and the valuation methodology. And you filed those questions where exactly? He had no answer, because the answer was that he had filed them in the same place he filed most things that threatened to complicate his management of the distance between himself and the world, which was nowhere, which was the drawer you push shut and choose not to open. This marriage, Naomi said, and her voice was very quiet and very clear, was built on a lie your father manufactured and you had questions about and chose not to pursue. And you want me to understand that you didn't know. I am telling you what is true. I know what is true, she said. I have known how to read what is true my entire life. It is how I survived every room in this city that looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. She took one step toward him, then stopped. The question I am asking myself right now is not whether you knew. The question is whether it matters. She went upstairs. She did not come down for dinner, or the following day's breakfast. She sat in her room and worked and thought and felt the weight of the decision she was carrying and did not yet know she was carrying something else alongside it. The test was a Tuesday. She stood in the bathroom at 6 in the morning and read the result with the particular stillness of someone receiving information that reorganizes everything. And she sat down on the edge of the tub and put both hands flat on her stomach and breathed. She was not frightened. She was something more complex than frightened. She was standing at the exact intersection of every decision she had made in the last 3 months and being asked to choose a direction, and the ground in every direction was uncertain, and she was 4 weeks pregnant, and the father of this child had just told her he did not audit a fraudulent acquisition. To when she had not spoken to him in 3 days, she called her Aunt Delia. Delia answered on the second ring. She listened without interrupting. When Naomi finished, the silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Come home, Delia said, for the weekend. You need people around you who have known you longer than this situation has. I'm not running, Naomi said. I know you're not running, Delia said. I'm asking you to rest. There is a difference. Your mother knew the difference. And you know it too. Naomi went to Atlanta for 2 days. She slept in the room that still had her teenage bookshelves. She ate Delia's cooking. She sat on the porch in December with a blanket and a cup of tea and looked at the sky and let herself be a person with a history that preceded this marriage. She came back to D.C. on a Sunday evening, and she was not the same as when she had left. Not harder, not colder, but settled in herself in a way that crisis had been preventing. And Callum was in the library when she got home. She knew he heard her come in. She went to the kitchen and made tea and stood at the counter and felt him decide from across the house to come to where she was. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. She said, "Sit down." He sat. "I'm pregnant," she said. The word landed. She watched it reach him, watched his face move through several things in rapid succession that he was not fast enough to conceal. First the impact, blunt and total. Then something that was not panic, something more than panic, rawer, more alive. His hands flat on the table, pressed down. "When?" he said. "Approximately 4 weeks." He exhaled, long, slow. "Naomi, I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want you to understand that clearly. I'm telling you because you have a right to know. What happens next is separate from what has already happened between us. Hamam and I am not going to let one become a hostage of the other." "You are not hearing me," he said. "I'm hearing exactly what you're saying." "I don't think you are." He looked at her, and there was something in his face she had not seen before. Not guilt, not obligation. Something that looked terrifyingly like a man who has just understood for the first time what it means to have something to lose. "I don't want to manage this. I don't want to structure it. I want—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "When I want to be in this." The silence that followed was not empty. "You said it yourself," she said quietly. "The circumstances were unusual." He flinched. It was small. It was real. "I was a coward," he said. "That morning, I was afraid of what I felt, and I defaulted to the one thing I know how to do well, which is create distance. And I said something unforgivable, and I have been sitting with it every day since." She looked at him for a long moment. "Fuck, your father built a fraud to acquire my family's legacy," she said, "and you're asking me to believe you want in." "Yes, hon," he said. "Why?" "Because the alternative—" He stopped. His hands came up briefly, then settled back. "The alternative is that I spend the rest of my life as the version of myself I was for the first 6 weeks of this marriage. And I have been that man for 19 years, and I am genuinely, completely tired of him." She set her tea down. She stood up. She looked at him with the full dark weight of her eyes and said, "I'm not ready to give you an answer. You are going to have to be in the discomfort of that for a while." "I know," he said. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in weeks, which she could not fully explain, and did not try to. December moved toward its close. Naomi stopped pretending she was not watching the situation evolve and started simply living inside it. She watched Callum change, not suddenly. You're not in a single transformative scene, but in the granular, undramatic way that real change actually happens. He came home earlier. He did not announce it. He simply appeared at the dinner table on a Wednesday and ate the meal Claudette had made and said, when Naomi mentioned the portfolio restructuring was 3 weeks ahead of schedule, "I know. Victor mentioned it. The board noticed." "Good," she said. "It was excellent work." She looked at him. "I should have said that 6 weeks ago," he said. "Yeah, when you corrected the model in the partners meeting. I should have said it then." "Yes," she said. "You should have." He did not look away from that. Victor came to dinner the following week at Callum's invitation, and Naomi watched the two of them together. Watch Callum be, in Victor's presence, something slightly closer to a person than the performance she was used to. Victor told a story about a Whitmore Capital deal from 3 years ago that went sideways in a particular comedic way. When Callum laughed, and briefly, fully, with his entire face, and then caught himself and looked at Naomi as if he expected her to note the incongruity. She just smiled into her wine. After dinner, Victor said, while Callum was in the kitchen, "For what it's worth, I have known him for 14 years. I have never seen him work this hard at anything that didn't have a financial metric attached to it." "I'll take that under advisement," Naomi said. "I think you already have," Victor said. How's the confrontation with Gerald came in January, 9 days before the board was scheduled to review the Osei Mensa portfolio findings. Callum had filed a formal legal challenge to the original acquisition structure 3 weeks prior, quietly through the firm's outside counsel, bypassing his father's team entirely. Gerald found out through the board chair. He arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning unannounced, which was, Naomi had come to understand, his preferred technique for establishing that he did not require permission to enter any room. She was in the library when he arrived. She heard his voice in the foyer. That particular cadence of a man who has confused command with authority for so long, he can no longer tell them apart. She heard Callum's voice in response. Quiet, unmoved. She did not go to the doorway. She listened to the shape of it, could not make out words, only tone. Gerald's voice climbing, Callum's holding flat. Then one sentence from Callum that cut through the thickness of the walls with enough clarity to reach her. This is my house, and that is my wife, and you will not walk in here as though either of them is a line item. Silence. Then Gerald's footsteps on the marble, the front door. Naomi sat in the library and felt something settle in her chest that was not forgiveness and was not resolution and was something more practical than both of those things. It was the feeling of watching a man make a choice you had not been certain he was capable of making. She was 5 months pregnant now, her body making visible the evidence of the night in the foyer in a way that the whole board, the whole firm, and the whole social world that watched the Whitmores had begun to note and comment on. She had stopped wearing clothes that minimized it 3 weeks ago. She dressed the way she always dressed, with intention and specificity, and with colors that honored her skin, with the full presence of a woman who had decided that the life growing inside her was not something to be modest about. She walked into every room the way she had always walked into rooms, like she had read them in advance and arrived prepared. The board presentation was a Friday in late January. Anna Naomi stood at the front of the Whitmore Capital boardroom, the same room where she had been introduced as my wife and nothing else 4 months ago, and presented the restructured Ose Mensa portfolio analysis alongside the legal findings that invalidated the original acquisition terms. She presented the fraud clearly, without theater, with the precise documentary fluency of a woman who had spent 3 months learning the architecture of a deception so she could dismantle it in 20 minutes. Gerald was at the table. He did not look at her. Callum was at the table. He looked at her the entire time. When she finished, the room was quiet in that way she had learned to receive, the way rooms go quiet when something irrevocable has just occurred in them. Garrett Pell said, Ms. Osi Mensa Whitmore, and I want to be clear that this board was not aware of the structure of the original terms. I know that, she said. That is why I presented it to the board. Gerald pushed back his chair. He stood. He said something to Callum in a low register. Callum did not respond. Gerald left the room. The vote to nullify the original acquisition terms and reestablish the Osai Mensa portfolio under equitable licensing terms was 4-1. The one was a board member whose relationship with Gerald Whitmore was the subject of its own subsequent inquiry. Naomi gathered her documents. She walked out of the boardroom. In the corridor, her legs chose that moment to feel the full weight of everything she had been carrying, and she put one hand on the wall and breathed. Callum was beside her before she registered him moving. Naomi. She straightened, looked at him. I need to say something, he said, and there was nothing managed in his voice, nothing calibrated. He looked like a man who has run out of performance and is standing in the open for the first time. I need to say it plainly, and I need you to hear it plainly. Say it then, she said. I spent 19 years deciding in advance that I was incapable of this, of being present in a way that didn't eventually become absence. I watched my father love someone and turn away from her, and I decided that was inheritance, not choice. And I used it as permission. He stopped. His jaw was tight. I was wrong, and I was cruel to you in this marriage in a way that I want to spend a significant amount of time making right, if you'll allow it. She looked at him for a long moment. That morning, she said, in the kitchen, you said the circumstances were unusual. Yes. Why did you say that? He was quiet for a moment. One, because it was the easiest way to hurt you without admitting I was scared. Scared of what? Of exactly this, he said, of standing in a hallway and meaning something to you and having you know it. She had known this already. Some part of her had known it from the partners' meeting, from the kitchen with the jollof rice, from the hospital room where she found him already there. She had known it the way you know things you are not ready to act on. She was ready now. Your father said Emmanuel's girl, like it was a lesser category, she said. You said I was not your type in a boardroom where there were witnesses. And you managed my existence in your house like I was a scheduling conflict for 2 months. Yes, he said. I need you to understand that none of that is paid for, she said. Not by the legal filing, and not by what you said in the foyer, and not by this hallway. You are at the beginning of earning something, not the end. I know, he said. Captain, and I need you to understand, she said, and her voice carried the weight of everything she was. All of it. The mother who died when she was 11, and the father who built empires in borrowed soil, and the woman who had walked into his house with 2 suitcases and the full knowledge of her own worth. That I did not come to this marriage to be saved. I came to survive it. Everything that happened after that was mine. All of it. The strength of it belongs to me. Yeah, he said, when in his voice was different from any way she had heard it. I know it does. She looked at him, at the gray eyes that had learned in the last 4 months to hold something beside calculation, at the jaw that was not set now but simply present, at the man standing in a hallway having run entirely out of distance. She said, then start now, and don't stop. He reached for her hand, not urgently, not desperately. The way you reach for something you intend to take care of, with the specific attention of a person who has learned what it means to be careless with something irreplaceable and is not going to make that mistake again. She let him take it. 6 weeks later, in a hospital room on a February morning, with the light coming gray and clean through the window, their daughter was born. When Naomi had refused the word labor because her grandmother had told her once that what women did to bring life into the world was not labor, it was authority. She held that word through the hardest hours, and it held her back. Callum did not leave the room. He held her hand through every wave, and he did not flinch, and he did not look away. And when the moment came, and their daughter announced herself to the world with the fierce, when affronted cry of someone who has arrived somewhere and intends to matter, he made a sound she had never heard from him. Broken open, completely unguarded, the sound of a man who has just met the thing that will end his ability to remain closed. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Naomi. He could not speak. She did not require him to. She held her daughter against her chest, her dark, luminous, extraordinary skin, her full mouth. Her grandmother's high cheekbones already emerging like a promise of the woman she would become. And she felt the room, and the contract, and the boardroom, and the gala, and every untouched dinner plate, and the corridor, and the Maryland rain, and the hospital hallways of her father's long recovery, and all the silences she had breathed through, settle into their true proportion. They were behind her. All of it was behind her, and not because it had not happened, but because she had not let any of it happen to her identity. She had carried herself through it without losing the specific, irreplaceable architecture of who she was. Victor was in the waiting room, which she had expected. Delia had flown up from Atlanta and was in the corridor outside, which she had also expected. Her father, Emmanuel, who had traveled with his care coordinator and who was having one of his best months in 2 years, he was sitting in a chair in the hallway when they wheeled her out. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his granddaughter. His eyes filled slowly, the way still water rises. I see you, he said to Naomi. I know, Dad, she said. I know you do. Callum stood beside them, one hand gentle on Naomi's shoulder. Present, steady, taking up exactly the right amount of space. Not performing anything, not managing anything. Simply there. Gerald Whitmore had resigned from the board 11 days prior. It had been announced in 2 sentences in a financial news brief. Naomi had read the announcement once and gone back to her work. The Osei Mensa medical portfolio had been restructured under Naomi's directorship as an independent division within Whitmore Capital. The terms were equitable, the licensing was transparent, and the work her father had built was finally held in the hands it was meant for. Emmanuel had cried when she told him. She had sat beside his bed and cried with him, which was the first time in several years she had permitted herself to cry without shame. Delia stopped in the doorway of the hospital room that afternoon and looked at Naomi and said nothing for a full moment. Then she said, Your mother would have found him a trial. She would have been correct, Naomi said. She would have liked him eventually, Delia said. He shows up. That matters. It did matter. Naomi knew it, and she did not need anyone else's permission to know it. And she did not need it to mean she had been rewarded for suffering or vindicated by his love. She had not been waiting for his love. She had been becoming herself consistently, fully without apology, through every month of that marriage. And the woman she was now was not the product of his transformation. She was the product of her own. The love was real. What was between them now was real and chosen and clear-eyed, and she wanted it. She chose it with the same precision she brought to everything. Having read the room, having understood the terms, having weighed what was being offered against who she was, and finding, this time, that the answer was yes. She looked down at her daughter. Small, dark, furious, perfect. "Hello," she said softly. "We have been expecting you." Her daughter opened her eyes for the first time and looked up at her with the unfocused, searching attention of someone trying to understand where they have arrived. Naomi smiled. Full, rare, devastating. She had kept every promise she made to herself, every single one. The queen had not risen because someone finally recognized her. She had been standing all along. If Naomi's story found something in you today, drop "I was standing all along" in the comments. Claim it because it belongs to you too. So share this with someone who needs to be reminded that surviving with your whole self intact is not a small thing. It is the only thing. Thank you for being here with us at Untold Desires by Mr. Lewis, where love is never simple and the women at the center of it are never small. Until next time, you already know your worth. Act like it.